Hello, I'm Joanne Baumgartner with the Wild Farm Alliance. We promote a healthy, viable agriculture that protects and restores wild nature, based in Watsonville, California. And today I'm going to talk about assessing biodiversity for the support of climate resilience. First, let's discuss what is biodiversity. Well, as you might imagine, it's a lot of different things. It's ecosystem diversity, which includes different kinds of habitats. It's species diversity, which includes different kinds of plants and animals. It's genetic diversity, like the different kinds of genes within a population of frogs, and it's ecological processes, such as nutrient cycling and carbon storage. There are two kinds of responses farmers can take to climate change impacts. One has to do with making the farm more resilient through adaptation, and the other with making the earth more resilient through mitigation of greenhouse gases. And the two are interconnected. For instance, a farmer that has increased pest pressure due to climate change responds by planting a hedgerow that supports beneficial insects. And this in turn reduces the impacts. See this feedback loop. And it's also mitigation. It's good for the earth because the woody hedgerow is storing carbon. See this other feedback loop, although this loop takes longer to achieve. That hedgerow increases biodiversity on the farm. Those plants and beneficial insects make ecological processes function. You'll see both images of the farmer, meaning adaptation, and the earth, meaning mitigation, later on in this talk. We've created this publication, How to Conserve Biodiversity on the Farm, Actions to Take on a Continuum from Simple to Complex, so that farmers, no matter where they are in their production strategies, can step in and increase biodiversity. This chart starts with, over on the left, addressing soil life. We'll go into, blow this up more and go into this in further detail, but it goes from soil life, soil cover, water features, flowering plants, native plants, plant structure and composition, and corridors, which link all these different kinds of habitats together. The more complex farm landscapes, the greater potential of supporting the plants and animals that provide the services that benefit the farm. The more complex the system, the more it's able to support the wild species that make our world function. The complexity also buffers the impacts from climate change. You can download this chart from our website. This is the first piece of the continuum on soil life, as I mentioned. And with many farmers working to be sustainable, they start here to build a healthy live soil which promotes plant growth. And how do you do that? Well, with organic matter. It's the basic food source that supports the diversity of micro and macroorganisms. Adding organic matter increases soil tilth, reduces erosion, buffers pH, improves water quality and water infiltration and water holding capacity, and it retains nutrients so fertilizer costs go down. It also enhances carbon storage. And as you can see here, there's the little farmer image on the left, along with that little image of the earth. And those, again, are referring to farm resilience and the earth's resilience. Reduced tillage helps to increase the microbial activity, and it helps with fuel savings. In Washington State, on the left photo, they're finding that there is soil microbial biomass increases with reduced tillage. At Phil Foster's ranch in California on the right, he's trialing 4 different cover crops on these beds, which can be mowed and then planted or transplanted into the mowed mulch. Here are some resilience indicators for biodiversity in the soil that you should consider tracking. How well the soil crumbles, is there aggregation of particles, can a wire probe pass through the soil easily, and what are the number of soil animals, the ground nesting bees, beetles, worms, etc. Second in the continuum is soil cover. Farmers are now doing more than just growing a healthy crop. They are supporting above ground complexity. Keeping the soil covered as much as possible protects water quality and conserves soil you work so hard to build. So using cover crops when cash crops aren't being grown can help with that. But so can conserving and restoring vegetation on the non-crop parts of the farm. Cover crops can also tie up nitrogen and stop it from off-gassing into the atmosphere or leaching into groundwater. At the USDA ARS station in Salinas, they found that it was best to use high seeding rates of legume rye mixtures to capture nitrogen early before it leaches. Untilled and vegetated areas can provide habitat for ground nesting bees and beetles. Ground nesting bees like this bumblebee on the left can be supported by conserving this non-tilled, well-drained areas. A beetle bank on the right conserves habitat for predaceous ground beetles. And they're pretty incredible. They can eat eggs of snails and slugs and different kinds of pest larvae like calling moth and Colorado potato beetle, which is great to have around. There's other kinds of beneficial insects like snake flies that also use this kind of habitat. Resilience indicators for conserving the soil and cropping systems are listed here, like the percent ground that's covered. Or is the field always planted to a cover crop during the off-season unless there wasn't enough time to do that? Are the field edges, ditches, canal banks, riparian areas vegetated? What about the sloped and otherwise erosion-prone areas? Are they covered? And then infiltration is a really good indicator, because if you have infiltration, i.e. no surface ponding and soil crusting, then the water will sink in instead of run off and cause erosion. And here are some resilience indicators for water quality, which are directly related to soil cover and conservation. Is the water not murky or sediment laden? Is it not greenish colored or with algae and mosses? And then the riparian area, is it buffered with vegetation that can filter all kinds of pollutants? And if animals are in the operation, are they on healthy pasture and not standing in excess manure? Grazing can be managed so that in the process of plants balancing their root to shoot ratio, root masses turn over and gradually produce stored soil carbon. This type of grazing optimizes the health of the forage, meanwhile protecting the soil from erosion and reducing impacts of drought. At Tomcat Ranch, managed grazing meant it had healthy forage even during California's drought. These are some resilience indicators for soil cover as it relates to grazing. Biomass and or height and cover of forage, color of forage, size of plant roots, plant debris, is there soil erosion, are there native plants present, and are invasive species present? Hopefully they're absent, because invasive species are one of the main reasons why there's a biodiversity crisis. They compete with and outcompete native plants, which support so many kinds of wildlife. Third in the continuum are nest, shelter, and water features. Farmers are bringing in artificial nests and conserving habitat and water, which means a little more of their time increasing the wildlife they support. By using these kinds of features or supporting them, they're bringing beneficial organisms closer to the crops. For instance, western bluebird density was increased in vineyards due to nest boxes, and they consume almost 2.5 times more sentinel prey than in control areas without nest boxes. These boxes are important because they are providing habitat that may have been lost as more and more forest fires start to occur because of climate change. Providing puddles and conserving springs and ponds and conserving water use supports beneficial birds and bats. And these wet areas aren't good to farm anyways. As some regions become hotter and drier, water for wildlife will be more critical. Some resilience indicators for water conservation include water still being available in natural sources like this creek. In this case, Peter Martinelli has captured winter runoff in a reservoir that he uses later in the summer. What you can't see, but what I did when I took this picture, was that there were steelhead smolt swimming by. Using drip and micro irrigation systems can reduce pumping costs and energy use that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. Practices in the continuum are getting more complex with flowering plants. This is where farmers are taking the time and energy to care for non-crop vegetation. Having beneficial insects present throughout the year will minimize pest outbreaks, which are predicted to occur more often as a result of climate change. By using flowering plants, I mean using non-invasive ones that provide nectar and pollen and are interspersed in crops, as you see here. This is Dick Pichot's farm. He grows over 1,000 acres of organic produce and uses alyssum to draw beneficials to and through his fields. He and some of his plate parcels also uses hedgerows. Annual non-native flowers support most, but not all, pollinators. They also support the adult beneficial insects, but do much less for the immature stages that require other insects for food. Habitat for all kinds of insects is needed because we're hearing that there's a general decline worldwide of insects, which is troubling because insects are one of the basic parts of our whole food web. Moving along the continuum now to native plants, these are better at providing the needs of wildlife than non-natives because they have co-evolved together. Farmers have to seek them out more because not every nursery carries them, but they are worth the extra effort. They're drought tolerant, and once established, they need little water. And in the future, as the planet continues to warm, they have a higher likelihood of providing suitable habitat for wildlife that will be on the move to find places to continue to exist. Beneficial insects like the predators and parasitoids need habitat that supports alternate prey or hosts, the herbivore insects. The stachinid fly on the left attacks cabbage loopers, among other things, and will attack the oak moth as an alternate host. This oak moth is a common species that feeds on oak foliage. So having oak trees around strengthens the food web in the landscape. Resilience indicators for insects involved in pollination and pest control are listed here. So are there sequentially flowering native plants, or are there flowering crops or flowering cover crops? And is this habitat available throughout the production season? Then what is there? Are there pollinators? The predatory insects, the parasitoids? What about spiders? Are they present? The complexity is increasing with the structural and compositional plant diversity, the shrubs and trees, which support various species throughout the lower, middle, and upper canopy, and especially birds, but others too. And this kind of habitat can be incorporated on the edges and in natural areas of the farm. Carbon will be stored in this woody biomass, and this kind of habitat is hedgerows, windbreaks, farm woodlots. On one organic farm, while hedgerows and riparian areas took 6% of the land, they stored 18% of the carbon. As mentioned, hedgerows provide structural habitat and support for beneficial birds. Birds are known to eat more pest insects closer to a hedgerow, probably because it gives them cover. Bird studies show the reduction of overwintering collie moth in walnut orchards, something that farmers Sarah and Dan Hurdy at Centrona Farms are happy about in the right picture. Because climate change is impacting nesting, migrations, and the synchrony between birds, habitat, and food sources, the more habitat they can choose from, the better. Not just live trees, but dead snags and brush piles can be important habitat. Bats use snags like this one with loose exfoliating bark. Bats also eat collie moth in walnut orchards, and it's estimated that they have an economic benefit of $10 per bat per year to the walnut industry in Northern California. Resilience indicators related to birds, bats, and other beneficials are listed here. Diversity of native grasses, shrubs, trees, and the habitat that supports the wildlife. But also brush piles, decomposing logs, snags. And then who are those species? The birds, bats, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. Are they there? And again, hopefully invasive species are under control if they are present, and maybe even they're absent. And last in the continuum are corridors. They knit together the habitat patches and pastures on the farm and connect them to the wilder areas. Which creatures use these linkages depend on the corridor size, condition, and location relative to places that the animals are moving to and from. These corridors provide movement of wide-ranging mammals such as predators that keep rodents in check. Large predators are important in the wider landscape because they help to keep the mesopredators like skunks in check that would otherwise kill too many bird nestlings. It's important to ensure that crops aren't farmed up to the edge of the waterways and that grazing doesn't degrade riparian areas. Farmer Paul Hain lost 3 acres of farmland when his creek overflowed. To combat this occurring in the future, we assisted him in installing riparian trees and shrubs to stabilize the banks. And as the planet warms, wildlife will need to disperse to new environments, and corridors will help them do that. Riparian areas on the right, as I mentioned, serve as wildlife corridors, but so can hedgerows, like the one on the left, and windbreaks. Hedgerows have pollinator and beneficial insect value. It's estimated that they provide about $600 per year for each 1,000 foot of hedgerow. They also store carbon in their woody biomass. Resilience indicators of how well corridors are functioning are listed here. The wider the corridor, the better. The closer the habitat patches on the farm to one another, the better. And the more continuous the corridor, the better they provide safe passage. Any fencing that is used is wildlife friendly, so animals can still move through their established pathways and they do not get caught up and harmed in the fencing. Other indicators are what kind of wildlife do you see there firsthand, and or what kind of wildlife friends, and are invasive species present and are hopefully absent. As mentioned previously, wide-ranging predators should be allowed to move through the farm into wilder areas. But in order for this to happen, farmers must practice coexistence. These are some resilience indicators related to coexistence, like guard animals, electric fencing, predator lights, having diverse landscapes that support natural prey for predators, using small animals when grazing, or putting small animals together with large animal when grazing. And then, are the predators there? And what about the existence of non-predators, the wild ungulates and prairie dogs, grassland birds? One last thought: because of misguided food safety requirements are sometimes made by buyers, it's useful to know what FDA does and does not require. FDA does not require the destruction of habitat or the use of fencing to fence out wildlife. But what they do require is that the crop, not habitat, be monitored during the growing season and immediately prior to and during harvest for significant contamination by domestic and or wild animals. Thanks so much. Don't forget to check out our website, wildfarmalliance.org. There's the biodiversity continuum chart you can find there and other resources. Also think about joining our mailing list. You can keep track of what we're up to, new publications that are coming out this year. And if you have any questions, please contact me. Love to hear from you.